All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 200 of the show. We have a very special returning guest to join us for the many festivities today, the one and the only Alexander John Shaia. So, Alexander, welcome back. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Glenn. It's always a pleasure, and I can't believe this is 200.
Me
This is
neither.
congratulations. You have run the course, my brother.
Thank you. It kind of snuck up on me. I got to like 180. I was like, oh, we're kind of nearing that 200 mark. And here we are.
Wow.
Here we
Wow.
are.
And a good 200.
I think so. Thank you. I feel like it's
I,
been.
I I love hearing your voice. I mean, there's something so genuine about what you bring. So thank you.
Thank you. So, fun fact: did you know that you were only the second guest I had on the podcast way back in, was it fall of 2018? You were the second guest. Did you know that?
Second guest?
Second guest.
Wow.
Yeah, I'd been doing solo episodes for a while where it was just me talking through things because I was honestly way too nervous and somewhat insecure to interview somebody. I was like, what would I say? What if I say something stupid? And so I had one recording with a guy named Phil Snyder. We talked about LGBTQ inclusion, which pretty much got me canceled by all of the evangelicals who were still on my Facebook friends list. And that was episode 3. And then I met you at Wild Goose the previous summer. And I thought to myself, I wonder if Alexander would want to talk to me. He seems like a very gentle spirit. So maybe he'd want to come and talk to me. And you did. You joined me on episode, I think it was episode 8. We talked about your book. And here we are. All this time later, we still
And
have.
was I in New Jersey at that point? I'm trying to think. It seems like I was in transition somewhere. Anyway,
I
maybe
think you
not.
were in New Mexico. And I remember I set up a table outside on my back porch because Jordan was still like very, very small. And there was like, she was having a major meltdown. And so I popped up the table outside. There were airplanes flying over my head. It was just a crazy day, but we did it. And here we are. We still have stuff to talk about. Can you believe it? We still have
Yes,
things.
yes.
Yes. We have not tapped out of things to talk about. So what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about Easter.
Okay.
Even though we're recording this in early April, the episode releases actually the day after Easter. And so I thought it would be a really good opportunity for us to maybe reflect with our listeners back on the events of the week before Easter, what we traditionally call Holy Week in the church. Now, I've already shared this with you kind of on the side, but to maybe set up our conversation, I want to make sure our listeners are on the same page with us. So if you wouldn't mind bearing with me, Alexander, as I kind of retell the story of my upbringing to give them a little bit of perspective. And for our listeners, this could be a little bit triggering depending on your upbringing. So hold on to your seats. Just a trigger warning, I guess you could say. But growing up for me, in the evangelical church, even in the Reformed church for a while, Holy Week was always like the pinnacle of like all of the weeks in the church year, right? Like we pulled out all the stops, the brightest lights, the best technology that we had, the biggest screens, all the things. And after Palm Sunday, where we handed out palm branches, the extra time in church kind of started late Thursday night with a Maundy Thursday service. And that service typically took place in the basement of the church. Lights were off, candles were lit. We divided into like small groups of 5 or 8 people. We sat around these round tables. We took communion together, and the focus was almost always on Judas's betrayal of Jesus or
Mm.
on Peter's 3 denials of Jesus. And the instructions were to pretty much identify ourselves with a Judas or a Peter, because just like them, we tend to betray and deny Jesus every single day. That was kind of like the main thrust of the homily or the sermon, whatever. Then we would take communion, we'd sing these very solemn hymns, and we would leave the basement silent. We weren't allowed to talk. We'd have to leave silent, get in our cars and drive home. And as if that wasn't, looking back on it, traumatizing enough, Monday, Thursday led into Good Friday. And that service also took place at night. But this time it was usually in the sanctuary of the church. And it was always very dark, again, very dreary. Lots of red. We'd have red lights sometimes shining on like the wooden cross, red curtains, all symbolizing the blood. And then the pinnacle of the service was after the sermon, we were instructed to actually write our sins on a note card, go up to the front in front of everybody, go up to this very giant cross. There'd be a long line of people, and we would take the note card and we have our sin written on it, and we walk up to the cross. We take a real 10 penny nail, a hammer, and we would drive this nail through the note card and nail it to the cross. And there was no music playing because I remember the pastor saying that he wanted us to hear the sound of the hammer hitting the nail throughout the course of the service, because every time we commit a sin, we were told we were kind of nailing Jesus to the cross all over again. So Saturday, then after Friday, we go home. Nothing happens on Saturday. We're just told to go home and kind of sit at home and reflect on these last two services, and then come back for Sunday for some sort of a celebration. And that was Holy Week. I mean, that was pretty much it. And I mean, it varied. Like that's kind of like a mishmash of a lot of my different experiences. But like for me growing up, like those were the main themes of Holy Week. Very somewhat celebratory on Palm Sunday, very somber Thursday and Friday, no idea what's going on Saturday. And then Sunday, you're supposed to come back and just be excited that Jesus rose from the dead and he's taking people with him who believe in him to heaven. And that was it. But you, my friend, have brought a much different light onto Holy Week for me and many other people. And I'm still processing all of what you have to say. So I thought this would be a really good opportunity for maybe some of our listeners who had a similar experience to me to maybe hear what you have to say, to maybe turn the diamond of the scriptures a little bit and these stories and give us a different perspective. So I have a notebook ready. I'm ready to take some notes, and I'm ready to hear what you have to say.
Wow. You just brought back a flood of memories from my childhood.
Yeah.
Of course, I grew up in Middle Eastern Christianity,
Hmm.
and we in those days had Holy Week, but it wasn't that. I remember that the foot washing service was very solemn, but it was beautiful. And then there was an all night vigil about staying awake with Jesus. And then on Good Friday, we all brought flowers from our gardens,
Hmm.
and we laid them in this beer or like crib-like piece that was then buried in a tomb, and just really beautiful laying these flowers in the tomb. And then on Easter morning, the tomb was opened, and we all took flowers, a different flower than what we brought. We took flowers home with
Hmm.
us anyway.
Yeah.
That's how I grew up. I love that. It fed me. It was the faith of my parents, and and then at Notre Dame in college, and then the years following that, and we're talking the 1970s, I began to discover a lot of what had been forgotten about how this all got started.
Hmm.
And I don't think we should always go back and do something simply because this is how it began.
Sure.
But I think knowing what was there in the early years of Christianity gives us a lot of space to rethink and redream and reimagine
Hmm.
um, an Easter that might fill our hearts with love and inspiration.
Yeah.
So, if I was out talking to the folks in my tradition, I would start out by saying something like, "How many times a year do we celebrate Easter?"
Yeah. For me, I would usually answer that as one, but I've learned from you to answer it a little bit differently.
So, for a couple of hundred years in our tradition, really the first 2 centuries of
Yeah.
Christianity, we celebrated Easter every Sunday.
Mm.
Every Sunday was Easter. And every Sunday we celebrated the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus the Christ.
Mm.
So, why after about 200 years, did the Christianity in the third century begin to think that they were going to do something on one Easter
Mhm.
that they didn't do the other 51?
Yeah.
And we might say, well, they wanted to more deeply meditate on those last days of Jesus. Well, perhaps, but that's not what they did.
Mm.
Um, this is my work has always been to try to discover what's going on in people's lives that leads our tradition to create something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that these great creations, these great feasts, come from the top down. I think they come from something that's going on in our lives, some felt need.
Mm.
And here's what I think is going on late second century, early third century, that led our tradition to set aside one of the 52 Easters every year and say, on this Easter, we're going to do something different from the other 51. All right. We know that there had been, in the first 2 centuries, a great deal of persecution. We know that the persecution by the Roman emperor was such that our tradition largely lived out of sight and underground. We know that the persecution was not about the name Jesus, but it was because of what we were doing because of the reality of Jesus. We were raising the status of women, who in those days largely were considered property. We were saying to slaves, you have worth and are welcome to sit at the table. When a lot of the Roman emperor didn't believe slaves were human, they thought of them as subhuman. We were saying to people, if you have means and wealth, you have a responsibility to share with those who have little. And we were saying to people, no matter where you were born in the empire, whether you were born in France or whether you were born in the Middle East or North Africa, that you are brother and sister to each other. In fact, we were saying that all of humanity is brother and sister to each other because we come from the same source.
Mm.
Well, all of those values and actions, the emperor considered to be a strike against what he wanted for his empire.
Mm.
That if these values took root, that the Roman Empire could not stand.
Mm.
So the persecutions began, and at times we were killed, and at times we just had to live through all sorts of legal maneuvers against us. We were literally people from the other side of this tracks, and we couldn't get jobs, we couldn't get schools, we couldn't get neighborhoods to live in. But it wasn't just persecution. It came in waves and it would let up. Well, as we get to the late second century and into the third century, the persecution is lessening.
Mm.
And we have the luxury, I'm saying we as Christians, have the luxury to talk to other communities. Because up to this point, if you were a messenger from one community to the next and you were carrying a letter and you were stopped by some official of the empire, you could be killed
Mm.
for that. So now came a moment where we could begin to talk to each other. And with great excitement and curiosity, how do you celebrate? What do you believe? How is your community organized? And what starts out in this moment with enthusiasm and interest, and what I might even call holy curiosity, soon becomes very difficult, because what we discover is a lot of diversity. And that diversity becomes the grist for a tremendous amount of tension that leads to argument, that leads to what are called the heretical wars, where we were theologically saying who's in and who's out. At this moment, Christianity says, we probably need to call ourselves back to prayer and spiritual practice. We probably need, in some ways, as a community, to go on retreat.
Mhm.
And this retreat is about that we want to find our taproot again. And our taproot is not that we're all going to think alike, not even necessarily that we're all going to believe in exactly the same way, or that our rituals are going to look exactly alike, but that we recognize each other
Mm.
as brother and sister from the same source.
Mm.
And so what happened was they developed that there would be this one Easter Sunday out of all 52 when we would say again to each other and before God our baptismal promises, or as I like to say, our baptismal vows.
Mhm.
Because our vows were the highest values and principles of how we wanted to live in the world and live with each other as the present moment body of Christ.
Mm.
Well, they recognized in those days that it wasn't going to be enough to just say, okay, we're going to show up on this one Sunday and somebody's going to pass out the vows and we're all going to stand up and say them.
Yeah.
But we should take a couple of days of retreat to really look at those promises again
Mm.
and to reanimate our life in those promises and to commit our heart to live them with each other and before God again.
Mm.
And so what you were seeing in these earliest days are that on this Easter, different from the other 51,
Mhm.
would be the community professing again its baptismal vows, and that prior to this Sunday, the community as a whole would be in a retreat, reflecting together on these vows and deepening them and praying for the grace of oneness. Because
Mm.
in those early days, they recognized that no matter how much our minds want us to be one,
Mhm.
that we've all got stuff. And we've always got stuff.
Yeah.
We're never going to have a moment where we don't have stuff.
You mean it's not gonna go away?
No, it's not going to
Oh
go.
no.
It's not ever fully going to go away. And that's okay because we're
Yeah.
always on the way. But we recognize that we need a grace, an experience, whatever your theological word, an experience of God, an experience of Jesus, an experience of Spirit, an experience of Trinity, something larger than just our very selves
Mhm.
that helps us move deeper
Mm.
to that felt oneness. And it was the oneness of the communities in these days was not just a mind thought, but we wanted a felt sense of oneness
Mhm.
because so many of us have had to leave our families, maybe even leave our villages, step out of the tribes that we were born in
Mhm.
because this Christian community was going beyond the sense of tribe that the Roman Empire world knew,
Mm.
which was you care for somebody because they are of your same bloodline,
Mhm.
or you care for somebody because they're of your same privilege. But the idea that we would be part of a community of all bloodlines and all genders and wealthy to poor and free to slave and educated and uneducated, this sort of community we don't have any models for in those times.
Mm.
And yet this community needed to have a felt sense of togetherness, like the biological or tribe community that you came from.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
we can say that in this earliest sense of Easter, as different from the other 51,
Mhm.
that they understood resurrection of the body as resurrection of our felt sense of oneness with each other
Mm.
and with God.
Yeah.
And that felt sense of oneness was also an increase in vitality, an increase in reconciliation, an increase in the desire to do justice. So it was not looking back in any way, sort of a video cam of those days in Jerusalem, but it was a recognition that we have a spiritual path of dying to something in us, some small part of ourselves, which has become a stumbling block to a deeper felt sense of oneness for all of us around the table.
Mm.
And hopefully, not just around the table, but a oneness that we could take out into the world to everybody.
Yeah. Mm.
So you see now how this early great, I'm going to call this great Easter as opposed to the other 51 Easters, this
Mhm.
early great Easter was built upon the spiritual practice of enlivening the communion
Mm.
and filling us with the joy and the inspiration and the love and the vitality and the increased sense of forgiveness that may have been there in our first days when we became Christian,
Mhm.
but because we live with each other and life gets confusing and there are all sorts of pressures, um, just it can just begin to ebb away. And
Yeah.
so they recognized, okay, once a year, let's do this together
Mm.
and let's reanimate the life of Jesus the Christ in our midst.
Yeah.
So really what's so interesting is to look back to those days and see, well, what did they do when they first got together for the retreat? And the
Mhm.
retreat was essentially 2 days long.
Mhm.
If we're looking at our week today, we might say the retreat is like maybe Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, maybe Friday, Saturday. And the opening ritual of this retreat was the leader of the community in those days, called a bishop. And the bishop's sign of authority was the staff that the
Mhm.
bishop carries, which looks like a shepherd's crook,
Mhm.
because the leader of the community is like the good shepherd.
Mhm.
Well, the opening of this retreat is the bishop or the head of the community calls us together to enter this 2 day retreat. And the bishop lays down the staff,
Mm.
lays the staff on the floor, and stands back with the community
Hmm.
and announces that for these 2 days, there are no experts, there are no theologians,
Right.
there's no clergy and lay. It's we, the people of God, standing together, desiring and praying for a greater spirit of love in our midst and a oneness with our God and with each other.
Wow. So there's nobody on stage telling everybody this is how it is, this is what it is, this is how to believe, and yeah.
And it's not,
Wow.
and there's no sense that you're not being called together because you're a sinner.
Yeah.
I like to call this early this 2 day retreat is what today we would call Lent. I like to call this that love calls to love.
Yeah.
That
Mm.
we know we have been called to this place because of love, and so therefore We want to feel that love. And if we can feel that love again in a fresh way, we will do love because
Yeah.
love calls to love.
So those 2 days, those like that was their equivalent of Lent. And
That's
so
how
for
Lent
us, it's
starts.
40 days. So for them, it's 2 days of focusing on the unity and the oneness. For us, it's 40 days of realizing how terrible I am. Right? I mean, it just seems like it's so we've it's like we have lost the plot, right? Yeah.
I just it yeah, we
Yeah.
have lost the plot.
Huh.
I
Hmm.
don't say that with any joy.
No. No.
But to know how this all got started and the beauty of it.
Yeah.
And I think this is the type of prayer that many people want returned today.
Yeah.
At least that's the truth I discover as I literally have gone around the world and talked about this.
Yeah.
So in these 2 days together, what the community is doing is they're reflecting on great stories from the gospel we call John,
Mhm.
and they're reflecting on these stories and asking to see their communal life deeper.
Mhm.
For instance, one of the great stories was Nicodemus. Another of the great stories was Woman at the Well,
Mhm.
Man born blind, and the raising of Lazarus. These are the four great stories that formed this 2 day Lent.
Mhm.
And each one of these stories had an impact about how, oh, oh, our way of understanding God has been too small.
Mhm.
Oh, our way of understanding each other has been too small.
Mhm.
God, lead us. Please help us see larger, help us feel larger, help us be one with this larger vision of you and each other.
Mhm.
So then the 2 day retreat ends,
Mhm.
and it ends after sundown on Saturday, and then there's this great night that we're gonna go together all night until the dawn.
Mhm.
And I'll start at the beginning. At dawn, when that light breaks in that sky on Sunday morning, on the Sunday morning that in those days we'll call Great Easter,
Mhm.
we're going to stand before each other and we're going to say again our baptismal vows before God and for each other. And not only are we going to do that with each other, you know what else we're going to do?
Mhm.
We're going to baptize the new ones.
Mhm.
So this became the great annual baptismal moment. But the new ones are being inserted into our life, and so we lead. It's like we're not there observing their baptism. We are professing the moment of our baptismal promises again, and because
Mhm.
we are doing that, then we pour the waters and we invite the new ones to go down into those waters and to come up out of those waters. And we see in them the journey that we've just professed again.
Mhm.
And now we celebrate together at the table. But between the 2 day retreat and that great dawn where we see resurrection in what we have done.
Mhm.
It's not that we're only thinking about Jesus coming out of the tomb, but we are doing historically around the same time that Jesus would have come out of that tomb. But the moment is not a historical proclamation alone. It's built on the historical moment, but it's the present moment action by our vows and by the new ones coming up out of the water.
Mhm.
It's resurrection here and now. It's a present moment reality,
Yeah.
not not a historical moment alone, not a moment looking to the future, but it's we are in essence doing Jesus the Christ now. All right. So now let me take a. Do you have a question before
There's a
we're
lot
the
there.
great night vigil to get up to the dawn? But
Yeah. So
look,
I mean,
that's where the bookends.
yeah. So in listening to you talk, the thing that I find so interesting is that when, like in the second, third century, when they realized there's all this diversity, right? Like you said, that they had this luxury now of speaking to other groups, other tribes, whatever, realizing that, oh, like there's, to borrow that Bart Ehrman text, the name of the book, it's the lost Christianities. Like there's multiple Christianities. Like they realize there's this diversity. They don't gather together in a room and decide how to eliminate the diversity, but they get together and say, how can we make everybody feel welcome at this table? Right? Am I understanding that correctly? And so then it's like, in my mind, I'm like, that's again like another way that we have so lost the plot, because we've in my upbringing, I know many people's upbringing, it's been we have to find the truth, capital T, and there's one way to believe, and everybody else's way is wrong. And we go through these seminary classes with these thick theology books that you have to memorize and know. And but in the heart of it, like our roots go back to that time where it wasn't there's diversity. Oh no, let's get rid of it. But there's diversity. Great. Let's bring everybody in and learn from each other. And I think that's so like that brings my heart alive, because I feel like that's the way it's supposed to be.
You remind me of there was a time a few years ago when I was working in New Zealand, and um, God bless them. There's a denomination in New Zealand called the True Jesus Church,
Mm.
and a number of these True Jesus churches are right across the street from a Catholic or an Anglican church,
Mm.
and you just know there's the um, and yes, it's like this early moment of Christianity. They were not perfect. They
Hmm.
didn't have everything
Sure,
resolved,
sure.
but they did have this sense that we can come together in a harmony, which is not a uniformity.
Yeah. Mm. Mm. That's one of the things I said to a few people who have had very strong disagreements about the diversity that I try to put out there with the podcast. Is I've said, I believe that we can move forward arm in arm, even if we can't see eye to eye. I don't need to see eye to eye with you on a certain piece of theology in order for us to move forward with our arms locked, trying to do what I think we both would consider to be the work of Christ, to love and to include and to show grace and all those different things. I just cut you off though. That just get into my mind.
No, I so appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's like I describe in some ways Christianity as sort of the balance beam at the Olympics or in gymnastics. It's one of my favorite things to watch because I think that's what we're trying to do. And it's there's this wide V
Hmm.
of Christianity with all of this complexity and all these variables, and it's all beautiful. And then there's these two realities of we've gone too far on either side. And one side where you would fall off the balance beam is Jesus was just a good man,
Hmm.
and the other side is that Jesus was only God. Jesus was God pretending to be a man,
Mm.
and that sense of only divinity or only humanity is sort of the two sides. In the middle, trying to understand how Jesus is both divinity and humanity, there's a wide range of how we can do that, and that's
Yeah.
all welcome at the table.
Yeah.
And
I like that. That's good.
all right, back to the
Hmm.
great night.
Yep.
So we've come out of our 2-day retreat, and we're headed towards dawn, where we're gonna recommit ourselves to our baptismal promises, and we're going to invite new ones to be baptized. So the first ritual after we come out of the hours of retreat is we wash feet.
Mm.
Now, this is so interesting because I want to ask people to hold for a moment the memory of a foot washing service in Holy Week, because what you're seeing here is where Holy Week came from.
Mm.
And I want you to understand how far away Holy Week is from how this all began.
Mm.
For 100 years, the 2nd century of Christianity, every time we came together on Sunday, we did two things. And we said that they were both expressions of communion. We washed feet. Every Sunday we washed feet, and we called that communion. And then we took bread and cup and called that the second form of communion. And we did
every Sunday.
Every Sunday.
Wow.
And we were following sort of the attitude of Paul, and I know for many of us, he may not be our most favorite guy. I happen to have a great deal of affection for his teachings, but I understand them in a way that most people would disagree with me. Anyway, Paul had always said that it's not so much the question of the body on the table as it is the body around the table.
Yeah.
And it was out of this teaching that Christians came together and said, it's the attitude of foot washing that magnifies the body on the table. And so, following from the Gospel of John, every Sunday they washed feet and then took bread and took cup. Well, so then when this retreat and Great Easter got started, what appears to have happened is somehow it was decided that they would no longer do foot washing every Sunday, but they would reserve it for once a year to be the first prayer of Easter Sunday night. Now, you have to remember that they are saying that the night time after sundown on Saturday is what they call Easter Sunday night, and Easter Sunday night is followed by Easter dawn. I know it's like a mind twister. So they do foot washing to open this great night, and they are celebrating foot washing as communion, and they are celebrating foot washing as the lived experience of resurrection, because they are saying that it is only by the aroma of resurrection that we would be called and want to wash each other's feet. So after this 2-day retreat about oneness, then we do oneness. But the thing is, it's not being done like the last night before Jesus dies. It's not being done with all of that stuff that has been accrued to it today. It's being done because it is one of the most powerful moments in the entire year. And it's being done because after 2 days of praying to want to do this, now we do this. And then a little bit later in the night, we do a prayer, because we're going to stay up all night. So a little bit later in the night, I love the image of this because I come from the Middle East. I understand this. You know, Westerners think you go into church and you stay there until the service is over and then you go. No. It's not the Middle East at all.
Right.
You go into service, you're there for a little bit, you go outside and you take a drink or maybe even light a cigarette or take a walk around the block and then come back in. It's this much more fluid thing. It's not this locked in your seat for the whole time.
Right.
I love in the Greek Orthodox tradition. It's like this long, great liturgy is going on, and over in the social hall, they're serving food,
Hmm.
and you're going back and forth. All right, this is more like what I mean when I say that they were up all night.
Hmm.
So a little bit later in the night, there's going to be this prayer around the four-armed equidistant cross. This is not, quote unquote, the crucifix. There is no body on the cross. If there's any sense of a body on this cross is the body of our community.
Hmm.
And this cross is the place of tension that we've decided to walk with,
Hmm.
because we understand that the tension between height and depth, and the tension between east and west that sort of makes up the equidistant cross,
Hmm.
is the tension of the holy.
Hmm.
And the tension that we have between each other, because we're passionate, because we love deeply, because we care greatly, because there's always so much more to do than we can do, all of that tension. This prayer is about how we hold that tension,
Hmm.
and we ask for the grace of Jesus the Christ to bear this tension lightly,
Hmm.
and to know that in some ways this tension is it's holy, and I want to use the word, it's even salvific in that sense.
Hmm.
Because how we hold this tension is a lot of how we get to deeper oneness with each other.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because where you live with great intimacy with each other, there's always going to be tension.
Yeah.
And the tension is not there to explain away, or even in some ways to resolve away, but rather to live with in love.
Hmm.
Because the tension is taking us deeper in our spiritual walk. Anyway,
And that equidistant cross is what I see you have your necklace. And I've seen that a few times, and that's what that equidistant cross is.
yes.
Is it so it symbolizes, like you said, the tension, and the tension is what ultimately leads us to deeper unity. Hmm.
And in these days, the baptistry was always this image. The baptistry was a large equidistant cross.
Hmm.
Where this prayer happened late at night was we prayed around the baptistry. We saw the baptistry as our commitment to walk this life of love that was also going to be filled with great holy tension, because we wanted to be a community of authenticity which respects everyone's inherent uniqueness.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the gospel that we would pray around this at this moment is the Passion of John, is the gospel account of John, where if you can forget Matthew, Mark, and Luke for a moment and just read John, you
Let
will
John
understand.
speak for himself. Yeah.
Yeah, there's um, no agony in John. Jesus doesn't suffer in John, not
Yeah.
one iota.
Hmm.
If we only had John's Passion and not the other three, we would think that this would have been a walk in the park. Jesus says, "I've chosen this moment." Jesus essentially says, "I put myself on this cross." Jesus chooses the moment he's going to die, and from this place, Jesus creates new community,
Yeah.
giving the beloved disciple to his mother, and his mother to the beloved disciple. And that's exactly what happens when we bear the cost of love without counting the cost.
Mm.
Now, it's not every moment of our lives that we can reach the majesty of John's passion. I think perhaps many women might know it better than we men in childbirth.
Yeah.
And actually, John's passion is an image of birth, because from the body of Jesus the Christ on the cross, what flows out? But blood and water.
Yeah.
And where else does that happen in human life but at birth?
Mm. Mm.
And what is being birthed in this incredibly loving passion is an us and a oneness.
Mm.
Anyway, and from this moment on the cross, Jesus breathes out like the first breath of creation.
Mm.
That breath that holds the cosmos.
Mm.
Anyway, this is why John's passion is not a Lenten passion. This is why John's passion was considered by our ancestors the passion to be read on Easter.
Mm.
On Easter. John is an Easter passion. Matthew, Mark, and Matthew and Luke
Right.
are a Lenten passion,
Yeah.
not John.
Mm.
So then the great night goes on and it goes on, and there are other rituals, including the beautiful ritual late in the night where the fire of the Easter candle and the depths of water of the baptistry are joined, and there's this beautiful imagery about the sacred union of opposites in all of life, and that happens late in the night, very, very close to the coming to dawn. So all of these, everything that happens after sundown on Saturday, for our ancestors, were the prayers of resurrection. They are the prayer. And the final great prayer of Easter will be the baptismal promises, the baptism of the new ones, the anointing with oil if people are to be anointed, and then together we gather at the new table, and then probably go home for a long sleep.
Yeah.
So that's the story of how all of this started.
Mm.
And then I don't know whether it's important now to talk about how it dissolved and how we ended up with something called Holy Week, and why I think today, please, 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 if you are just coming to the practice of Easter, think about a new way. Don't think about the Holy Week way.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question, was because this episode is the day after Easter Sunday. And so now someone who has maybe just gone through Holy Week, maybe they still go to church, maybe they don't, but maybe they had all these memories last week of, stuff from their childhood. Now kind of having this perspective going forward, what you said earlier, Easter's not over, because Easter was celebrated every Sunday. Every Sunday was Easter Sunday. So as we leave this larger Easter Sunday and we go on with the rest of our year, what is it that we can take away from this wisdom that you just shared with us to apply to today and tomorrow and every day going forward?
There is something called resurrection. And we see it in nature when coming out of winter and leaves burst and blooms dazzle our eyes, and
Yeah.
sometimes we sneeze, and
All the time I sneeze.
but resurrection is not an unusual experience. It is a usual experience.
Yeah.
And I want people to remember that in the depths of inner winter,
Hmm.
and right now there are a lot of places in us that are in a time of inner winter,
Yep.
but inner winter will give way to a springtime,
Yeah.
and grief will give way to new life.
Yep.
And our ancestors would say, pray for it. Pray to receive that energy.
Mm.
And don't think about it only as something that's going to happen with your last breath, but think about it as something that can happen with each breath.
Yeah. It's
That
really good.
Jesus the Christ dies and rises in your life and with you right now.
Mm.
And any day of the year can be a personal Easter.
That's right. Mm. That's so good. I was talking to a friend the other day, and they're on a similar journey that I'm on. And we were talking about how in the past all of our focus on especially the big pieces of Jesus's life, the virgin birth and the resurrection, like the beginning and the end, like did these things really happen? Like is and it's is it it's truth if it really happened. And if it didn't really happen, then it's not truth. And I remember we were talking about how like we used to be so, into like the debates for all those things and all the different ways to try to prove different things. And now we were both saying like all of that stuff is irrelevant because whether it's historically accurate or not, whatever, it's still true. And it's true because I see resurrection every day. Like I see resurrection uh, all throughout the course of a day. I mean, there's constantly something that comes across my path that I think this should be the end of the road for whatever it is. And then boom, there's new life on the other side. I see, even speaking of like the virgin birth, I see things being birthed every day out of darkness where things should not be birthed at all. And like these things this is what makes it true. And so like when you're speaking about that, I think that's the key. And I can remember sitting in a church service when I was in seminary. And I remember the pastor was talking about Marcus Borg's book, talking about how he was questioning, the reality of the resurrection or whatever. And really the whole sermon was about this idea that, resurrection had to happen in the past so that it can happen in the future. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I didn't have the language yet, but you just spoke it so perfectly that it's not just a past event or a future event, it's an in the moment event. And that's what that sermon was really lacking, was there was no conversation about the resurrections that happen in our lives today. And I think that that's that such important piece that you just brought to it that I hope our listeners take away, is that we all go through these times, especially in these days where it seems like it's the end of the road for whatever reason it might be, but there's always new life on the other side.
It is. And it's not an accident that our ancestors chose for us in the Northern Hemisphere to make Great Easter in the springtime.
Right.
And it's not just only because it was historically near the time of Passover, because if you really look back at the record,
Mhm.
they expressly did not want to celebrate Easter with Passover. They wanted them to be two separate spiritual realities.
Hmm.
No value one or the other, but they said you don't celebrate Easter when it's Jewish Passover because
Mm.
there are two realities to two different traditions. Anyway, just
Mm.
an interesting piece because um, Christian Easter was not built on a replication of Jewish Passover.
Mm.
But our language has sort of said that over and over again. We've tried to make it true, but it's not the reason it was created.
That's a podcast for another day right there.
That's another one.
That'll be episode number 230.
All right.
Hey, this is so good. We're just about out of time, but Alexander, this has been a lot of fun, as always. And I just want to say too, thank you for not just the time today, but just for all the faith you've shown in me since that first time we recorded all those years ago. I think a large part of why we're at 200 episodes is because of you. You're a cheerleader, you're a friend, and I thank you.
Glenn, it's been an honor and a delight. Keep going, brother.
Thank you. And as always, I'll put your links in the show notes, and we'll be doing it again soon.
Okay.
All right, my friend.